Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin with the session right now. Thank you all for joining us for the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the issues on climate change and sustainability. My name is Karthika Sharma. I'm a research associate here at TERI, and on behalf of the entire family, I welcome you all here. Before we commence the function today, a brief safety announcement. During the event here at Stein Auditorium, TERI is a health and safety environment certified organization. In case of any untoward incident like fire evacuation is required, you're required to exit from this auditorium through the fire exit gate nearest to you, and we'll make sure there are 7 exits here, 4 at the ground floor and 3 up top. We have a fantastic line of speakers ahead for us for this session on G20 leadership for the Green Development Pact. The session will be chaired by Dr. Anshu Bharadwaj, CEO, Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, and Ms. Suruchi Bhadwal, Program Director, TERI. Moderators, the floor is yours.
So, thank you for joining back. We have with us an eminent panel of speakers who will be joining us either virtually or in person. And I'm sure you are all very eager to hear them out. We just wanted to make an announcement prior to the start of the session that we will be extending and eating into the break time by 15 minutes because I do expect that, since we have such esteemed panelists on the dais, we should be spending some time after we hear them out in terms of interacting with them. So I hope that we are able to stick to the time and close in 1 hour and 15 minutes. And let me hand it over to Mr. Anshu Bharadwaj to begin the proceedings of the session. And then, of course, we'll see how the session basically goes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all? I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you and good afternoon to everyone, and very welcome to this afternoon session on G20 leadership for a Green Climate Pact. Friends, this is a very important discussion in the context of climate change for multiple reasons. As Suruchi said, we have a panel of extremely well-known and eminent experts who will talk about various aspects of this subject. I'll just take 3-4 minutes to set the context before we request our speakers to come in. The importance of G20 as a group to solve the climate problem obviously is very well understood, considering that G20 occupies majority of the world's GDP, economic output, exports, emissions, historical stock of emissions, etc. So if we have to really find meaningful solutions to climate, the role of G20 is obviously very important. Now, amidst that, India took on the G20 presidency this year. And that adds one extra layer of importance to this discussion for a few reasons. One, among the G20 countries, unlike other countries which have achieved very high levels of prosperity, economic growth and prosperity, India still is a developing country with an unfinished developmental agenda ahead of us. We are making very good progress, but still some distance to go. That's one. Secondly, unlike many G20 countries whose economic growth depended very closely on fossil fuels, India's journey most likely will be different, because we are already seeing signs of decoupling of India's growth from fossil fuel consumption because of the deepening of energy efficiency and renewables into our energy mix. So in that sense, the path which India takes will be different from what other countries have already done in history, where their growth came very closely coupled with fossil fuels. And finally, we are living in a time where we are seeing unprecedented innovation and R&D in clean technologies. Solar, batteries, energy efficiency, you name it, there is very robust innovation happening everywhere. That gives us confidence that what India does, and India is chartering unprecedented and territory, what India does could be a new economic growth model for rest of developing world to follow. So in that sense, this becomes a very important discussion, how India can weave into G20 narrative a new growth paradigm which is climate friendly, and doesn't cause any environmental or ecological damage. Now, India has talked about the Green Developmental Pact. Our foreign minister did mention about that in a recent speech, which is based on 5 pillars: life, which is lifestyles for environment, circular economy, climate finance, accelerating progress on SDGs, and energy transition and security. So we would be keen to hear from our esteemed panelists their thoughts on how these various 5 pillars or India's aspirations can be weaved in the G20 agenda, or any other thoughts they feel how G20 can accelerate action on climate. So with that, I'll stop. We have a panel of 7 speakers today. We'll start with a video address by His Excellency Mr. Michael Bloomberg, who has pre-recorded a message, who is United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions, and also the founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies. So may I please request his video to be played on.
Hello, everyone. Let me thank TERI for hosting this summit, and thanks all of you for taking part. It couldn't be more important or more urgent. Climate change is accelerating and affecting more and more lives. At the same time, the steps we take to fight climate change also benefit the economy and public health by cleaning the air and water. And the faster we act, the more lives we can save. India's G20 presidency is a great opportunity to help show the way forward. India has set ambitious goals for more clean energy and electric vehicles and is taking important steps to turn those commitments into action. Through the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, India is helping countries work together and share ideas. And Indian businesses are finding innovative ways to cut emissions and to collaborate with government leaders to attract more green investment capital. Bloomberg Philanthropies is working closely with India in many of these areas. TERI is a key partner for us, so let me again thank everyone at the organization for their leadership, and thank you again for all of your work. All the best.
We move on to our next speaker, Professor Ian Martin, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Deakin University, to share his thoughts with regard to institutional commitment with regard to green development and contributions to the G20 and leadership beyond. I also want to mention that TERI treasures the relationship that it shares with the Deakin University. We have a long-standing relationship of more than 10 years, if I were to say. And TERI and Deakin established the TERI Deakin Nanobiotechnology Center in 2017, which we are proud to be hosting in our TERI Retreat campus, a few kilometers down from here in Delhi. We are also basically, proud to stay associated with Deakin University in terms of discussions to see how we can force bilateral cooperation on many issues with regard to resource efficiency and management. With that, I would basically invite Professor Ian Martin to take the floor and share his proceedings. Thanks.
Friends, colleagues, our wonderful partners at TERI, it is an honor to be with you here today. As has been said, I'm the Vice-Chancellor of Deakin University in Australia. I'm going to wind the clock back to start with. April 2021, mid-pandemic and in between lockdowns, of which in Victoria there were many. I had the huge privilege of launching our renewable energy microgrid, which is the largest solar farm on any Australian university and actually one of the largest anywhere in the world. This was a really proud and important moment for our university, and every time I go and have a look at it, I am reminded of just how impressive it is and what it is doing. It's situated on our Warm Ponds campus. It delivers about 7 megawatts, linked to a 1/4 megawatt of rooftop storage generation, and a state-of-the-art research centre. It forms a central part of our university's commitment to be carbon neutral by 2025 and carbon positive by 2030. The first I am confident about, The second is really bold, but we think we really should be doing that. I know our goals are ambitious, but they should be. If we are going to be a research leader, an industry engagement leader, and to be able to bring together the right skills to deliver a carbon neutral society in Australia and across the world, working with our partners, those goals have to be ambitious. If we're going to do it by 2025 and be carbon neutral, we've got to find about another 15,000 tonnes of carbon reduction per annum. We think we can do it. We have plans. But it is going to require an ongoing commitment. And it's not a commitment that the university alone can deliver. And one of the themes that I'm going to talk about today is if the G20 is to deliver, it has to find ways of building bridges between universities, governments, and industry, linked together by policy that recognises the sheer complexity and local impact of what they're talking about. Deakin last year was named as one of only 6 trailblazer universities in Australia, and we've been given a very significant investment to develop a research commercialised hub in the field of clean energy and recycling. It's not about just the fundamental discovery research, it's how we go and work with companies to actually put that into play. We've recognised the important commitment of this. Enabling a sustainable world is one of just 5 research impact themes we have for our university. So, I'm standing up here as a Vice-Chancellor, and you might be thinking, well, what's this got to do with the broader global ambition, the G20 topic we're talking about today? We're a relatively small carbon producer, and our efforts, while significant for us, pale in the face of the global challenge. So we could easily sit there and say, well, what difference does it make? Do we really need to do this? And how do our organisation's goals link to those very much bigger geopolitical and economic consideration that our G20 leaders and the Green Development Pact have to address? But I would say to you today, actually, we are a really important analogy of what needs to be done globally. Because too often, the argument that comes in facing these challenges is we individually, a nation, a community, a company, are simply too small. Even if we become carbon neutral, we're not going to make the blindest bit of difference to the global challenge. So why should we put ourselves out there first? Why should we be taking the challenge, the pain to do this when others are not, even if they're much bigger commitment? I would argue that it's not having a small impact that matters, it's the leadership that matters. Our sacrifices as an institution to do what we're doing are small, but we need to recognise others are going to have to make much bigger sacrifices and changes. If we can't demonstrate that leadership as a university, as a relatively small population country, how can we work with the rest of the globe to address this challenge? The G20 challenge is about leadership, and that is why it is so important the G20 embrace and do this, because without that leadership, it will not change. In my own small world, I talk a lot about big L leadership and little l leadership, and solving climate change is going to need both. Our political leaders carry the mantle of big L leadership. They have a job that by definition implies leadership. They can go so far, but it's the little l leaders in companies, in universities, in communities that actually apply what we know and do it locally that will make the difference. Universities have a unique role in this. They've played a fundamental role in giving us the technologies that enable us to address climate change. And certainly in Australia, we are very, very proud as a nation that almost all of the rooftop solar panels anywhere in the world carry Australian IP coming from the University of New South Wales. So I think that's a very proud moment. So universities are at the fulcrum of that scientific and technological progress. We as a university want to make sure we use our capabilities and assets to be both ambitious but also demonstrate leadership. But we don't stand alone. We know through our Australian and Indian university partners that there are many others who are committed. And I think our Indian partnerships, our many other partnerships, give us a network and a framework to work with our research power, our industry networks, We can form part of that sustainability ambition as we cross sectors and international borders. And I think the other challenge with this is not confined to nations. This is a genuine global challenge. CO2 does not stop because there is a border. We need universities to drive and discover and implement solutions for climate change, and it will continue to rely on university, government, industry partnership, and I will keep on coming back to that as a theme. If we cannot align those three forces, we will not be able to deliver what we need to be able to deliver. This is probably the single issue that requires that coalition, and framed through the G20, I think we've got more chance of delivering. Australia and India are separated by 8,000 to 10,000 kilometres, but we are joined by an almost complete sharing of economic and social challenges. Clean and renewable energy, sustainable economic development, food security, water security, they are the same set of issues. They're ones that with TERI we are both working to grapple. But it's not just confined to TERI. We're working with IIT Madras as part of the Australia-India Centre for Energy, again, thinking about how we work together transnationally to deliver. I've talked a little bit about our solar rooftop commitment. Renewables are great, but until we can store significant and industrial quantities of energy, we are not going to solve our challenges. And I think if I look at what we have available technologically now, if we didn't do any more development with solar rooftop generation and wind generation in Australia, we could probably become completely green if we can solve the storage piece. And so for us, working on hydrogen, being realistically one of the few available practical solutions at the moment, is also really important for us. And again, as part of our commitment to a living laboratory, we're currently working through a plan to integrate our solar farm with hydrogen generation, storage, and fuel cell electricity generation, because we want to create a scalable model that smaller communities can actually adopt and use locally. Because one of our fundamental premises is much of what we will need to see in the future with sustainable energy is that grid of grid models, local generation, local storage. We as a university, I think, can play a role. There's also the component of workforce. We need to have a solid workforce to deal with this, and again, energy is really important. So we work with India on that workforce piece, sustainability, the technology that drive it. How do we get to the point where we need to get to? I think India's commitment is truly remarkable. I've been visiting India for nearly 40 years now, which is quite scary. And the change that is happening here and the change that I've seen over the last 5 to 8 years in particular is quite remarkable. The conversations about sustainability in India across the community are happening in a way that even 3 years ago you would have never imagined. And I think there is no better country at the moment to have the G20 presidency, given how India is managing many of these changes. We need to have bipartisan, multi-partisan political commitment over decades, and that's going to require bold decisions that our G20 leaders get behind and stick with. As a university, we're in a great position to help. Our university partners are. It's not just about the science, we can also help develop the policies that need to sit behind the science. Because ultimately, it's not about the technology now, it's about policy and community will to do the changes that we need to do. So much of what we need to do relies on social change, and universities can and should be seen as trusted experts who can help our G20 leaders navigate their way through this. We know that social science and its integration into any strategy to fight climate change is absolutely critical. And I think it was absolutely pleasing to see the foundational strategy in the draft Green Development Plan, Pact Life, Lifestyle and Environment, because it emphasises that importance of social change and social impact. We have a commitment to say to individuals and local communities, don't feel powerless. Give them the tools to effect positive change for environment. Small changes in behaviour make a huge difference when you multiply it not just millions of times, but billions of times. And our expertise in delivering the social science behind many of those small nudges as a sector in partnership is going to be so important. This is not just ideas and academic guessing. Most of the successful behaviour change programs that Australia has seen over the years, anti-smoking campaigns, anti-skin cancer campaigns, SunSmart, have all relied on easy-to-adopt, multiple small changes. And I think, again, there is the challenge for our leaders, is how do we bring it together? Successful society-wide behaviour change programs create the conditions where it is easier, I'm not saying easy, but it is easier for individuals and organisations to make a choice in the right direction. The G20 is the right political mechanism to drive this because of the sheer scale of the economic power that sits behind it. But it needs to drive down from that very high-level conversation around macroeconomics right the way down to local communities. And I come back to where I started. Individual institutions trying things, leading locally, has to be a part of this. And I think we look to our leaders to enable and facilitate that through policy, through economic models, and support and encouragement. There is no single solution. And indeed, there is no small number of solutions. We have to have a policy and implementation framework that allows the adoption of many changes that incrementally impact our footprint on the planet. One should never forget the power of compound interest. 2% change per year, compounded over 2 decades, makes the most enormous difference to what we are talking about. We were talking over lunch about solar cell technology. You wind the clock back 30 years, it was expensive, it was inefficient, few people could afford to see it as a realistic and sustainable generator of electricity. There was no magic year when it changed suddenly, but what we saw was a sustained effort to improve efficiency 1–2% per annum every single year. It is now the cheapest, most sustainable way, certainly in our country, to generate electricity. Still come back, we haven't solved the storage issue. This is not just about science. The science is exciting, the science offers us real opportunities, but it's about the fusion of technology, policy, and social adoption to deliver progress and not just change. I look forward to where these discussions go, but I think this is the single biggest challenge we face, but it's also the single most exciting challenge we face because the differences we can do will last for many, many, many generations. Thank you once again for allowing me to be part of the panel today.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Martin. Thank you very much for very crisp and insightful sharing your thoughts. I totally agree on the role of coalitions of universities, industry, and government, and also like to point on the interdisciplinary part of science, social sciences, and economics. India's LIFE project is actually an experiment in social sciences of behavioral change. So totally echo on you. Friends, we now move on to Mr. Amitabh Kant, Sherpa of G20, Government of India, who also was the CEO of Niti Aayog for many years, and a distinguished civil servant. Over to you, sir.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first compliment TERI for this World Sustainable Development Summit. Today's discussion relates to Green Development Pact in the context of G20. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us. G20 is critical because it accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for about 78% of the global trade, 2/3 of the population. G20 is also important because it comprises of all the top leaders of the world when they meet on 9th and 10th September in Delhi. And when leaders of the world meet, they discuss about the future of the world. They need to discuss about the lives of citizens. And therefore, as a run-up to this presidency, across several working groups, both on the finance track, on the Sherpa track. We're discussing a range of issues from the lifestyle for environment, that is behavioral change by both individuals and communities. We're discussing issues of circular economy. We're discussing issues of energy transitions. We are discussing issues of resilient infrastructure. We are discussing issues of financing for climate action and sustainable development goals. We are discussing issues of equitable development, and we are discussing issues of biofuels. And we're also discussing issues of green hydrogen, the fuels of the future. All these are issues under discussion, and they will be discussed right up to the Leaders' Summit. The important thing to understand is that many of the developing countries are not responsible for carbonizing the world. If you look at the total carbon space available at 1.5 degrees centigrade, a country like India accounts for just 1.5% of the total carbon space utilized. Whereas logically, on a per capita income basis, it is entitled to about 17.5% of the total carbon space available. The developed countries have accounted for almost 88% of the total carbon space utilized. But irrespective of that, India believes that it must be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. And therefore, it took several measures, and in COP21, for the NDC targets that it had committed to, it was the first country in the world which achieved its NDC targets 9 years ahead of schedule. We've pushed a very rapid renewable program through very transparent competitive bidding. We have close to about 165 gigawatt of renewable power today. But irrespective of that, it's important to understand that even if we do 100% renewable, we will be actually cleaning up electricity, which is just 20% of the total energy. In India and in many developing countries, electricity is only 20% of the total energy. And the balance, 80%, is what is known as the hard-to-abate sectors. And the hard-to-abate sectors are refineries, steel, chemicals, fertilizer, long-distance transport. And therefore, if we have to decarbonize the world, it's important that these hard-to-abate sectors need to be decarbonized. And therefore, you need renewables to crack water, use electrolyzer, produce green hydrogen. And India has the possibility, because it is climatically blessed and because it has top-class entrepreneurship, to be the least cost producer of green hydrogen. It has the possibility of being a major exporter of green hydrogen. It has the possibility of being a major producer of electrolyzer. To my mind, there are two key challenges. One is that the price of green hydrogen right now is about close to $5 per kilogram, which needs to be brought down to about $2.5 in the next 2 to 3 years and brought down to $1 per kilogram by 2030. This will require a massive size and scale. No other country can provide the size and scale which India can produce. And therefore, India has climatic condition, good entrepreneurship. It has the climatic condition. Probably the only other country which can match these climatic conditions is Saudi Arabia. But to be able to do this for size and scale, your entrepreneurship, to my mind, does not need technology. They are quite capable of going and getting the best possible technology, which they have done in the case of renewables and many other areas. But to be able to produce on a long scale this green hydrogen, you need long-term lending of 25 to 30 years, and you need new instruments which can enable you to do hedging. And the challenge is, to my mind, that the developed countries have not lived up to their commitment, which they had committed to at 2009 in Copenhagen of $100 billion per year. But irrespective of the countries, even if the countries do not live up to it, you need long-term institutional financing, and you need new instruments like blended finance, you need credit enhancement, you need first loss guarantees, and you need an instrument like agency like MEAGER to be able to do that in the World Bank. But these institutions were all designed for the post-World War II period, the post-Bretton Woods II period. They are not designed to be financing agencies for the climate change era of today. And therefore, unless you do not structure them to finance for both SDGs and climate finance, it will not be possible to get long-term financing. And therefore, these international institutions which do a lot of direct lending should actually become instruments, become agencies for indirect financing for a long period. And that is, to my mind, critical to be able to do that. The second other key challenge, to my mind, to bring the size and scale and to allow countries to push for green hydrogen is to allow a lot of free trade to take place. And the new Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act of the United States are the most protective pieces of any legislation drafted ever in the post-World War II period. They provide for a subsidy of $3 per kilogram for green hydrogen, only for hydrogen to be produced in the United States of America, even if it is commercially non-viable to do it. That is, even if it costs $7.5 to produce it, they'll subsidize to an extent of $3, but will not subsidize it for any other place in the world, even if it is produced at lowest cost. This is against the basic theory of market and against the basic theory of free trade, which the United States of America has propagated for the last, ever since 2047. And therefore, unless you don't allow your trusted partners like Australia, like India, like Korea to produce green hydrogen to size and scale and support it in terms of procurement, you'll never be able to get the size and scale. So that is, to my mind, very, very critical. And therefore, there are several components to any Green Development Pact, and that is, it would require, a Green Development Pact would require a major behavioral change in terms of the consumption pattern, in terms of community and individual action. It will require long-term financing. It would require restructuring of institutions to enable long-term financing to flow. It will require, through the disaster risk resilience working group, a complete focus on resilient infrastructure. Through the energy transition working group, it would require a huge focus on energy transition. Through the climate working group, you would require a huge focus on circular economy. And through the international financial architecture, infrastructure, and sustainable finance working groups of the finance track, you would require financing for climate action and for SDGs. So you need both the Sherpa track and the finance track, and a lot of political and administrative will for leaders around the world to transform the world and to make the world a better, cleaner, and a safer place, so that the Earth, even if it survives at 1.5 degrees centigrade, human beings will not survive. And for that, to ensure that human beings do not become extinct, it requires big-scale thinking, it requires vision, and it requires your ability of great leaders to be able to arrive at a Green Development Pact, which, to my mind, is absolutely critical and significant for a world of tomorrow. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Amitabh Kant, the Sherpa for the G20 and presidency this year. I think he very well highlighted the tall order and agenda that we have on the road up to the G20 with regard to various issues that we are trying to target with regard to different tracks of discussions that we have in the G20 process. Of course, you highlighted the challenges with regard to the carbon space, which is much restricted now, and how we do need leadership roles played by countries. It's just not about India playing the leadership, but I think it's about many countries out there who should be basically showing up pockets of leadership with regard to what we can do with regard to giving the important thrust to climate action, globally speaking. There are challenges with regard to what we are talking about, and of course it's not going to be an easy path for any one of us. You did mention about the hard to abate sectors and what are the key challenges with regard to the size and scaling up of some of these technologies that we are talking about, and the need for financial instruments to be able to support it. And for many of these technologies that we are talking about, the technologies of tomorrow, possibly we are talking about long-term commitments that we need from the G20. At least we have that expectation from the G20 countries to come forward and show that leadership. Of course, there are issues with regard to free trade, and I think that acts as a barrier if we are not able to kind of resolve some of the nuts and bolts of it with regard to the scaling up and the kind of assistance that possibly developing countries are looking towards when we talk about multilateral and bilateral cooperation and look towards the developed countries for assistance with regard to both technology and finance to help support these actions. With that, we move on to our next speaker. It is a ministerial address. It's a video message from His Excellency Mr. Stephen Guilbault. He's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change from Canada. And if I could request the floor managers to please play the video message for the audience.
Honorable ministers and summit members, it is a pleasure and a privilege to join you virtually again this year at the World Sustainable Development Summit, to speak to you on behalf of the Government of Canada. Thank you to the Energy Resources Institute for inviting me to say a few words. This is a critical decade for action. How we choose to deal with climate change, biodiversity loss, and widespread pollution will decide the kind of future we will have. Choosing an ambitious path to ensure we will have the best possible future and working on solutions to these complex global issues requires leaders from all countries to work together. For this, the G20 can play a critical role. As we enter a new year and a new G20 leadership cycle under India's presidency, Canada welcomes India's leadership. And we look forward to working together to advance sustainable development and other key priorities. Canada's 5th Federal Sustainable Development Strategy, to we tabled last November in support of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, brings together major Government of Canada social, economic, and environmental sustainable development initiatives. From conserving nature and biodiversity, tackling climate change, and banning single-use plastics, to improving the quality of life for all Canadians, such as championing gender equality, improving access to public transportation, parks, and green spaces. Canada supports India's proposed G20 focus on the blue economy, resource efficiency, and the circular economy and ecosystem restoration. We also look forward to working together for strong G20 outcomes on biodiversity, because nature is our strongest ally in the fight against climate change. That's why we would like to see the G20 commit to concrete actions toward the full implementation of the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, a global 30% conservation goal for 2030. Canada also recognizes that plastic pollution is a global problem that requires urgent global solutions. We welcome the opportunity to work with G20 partners and others to advance a legally binding international agreement to end plastic pollution. Canada also believes that the G20 must deliver strong support for increasing ambition on climate mitigation to keep 1.5 degree temperature goal in reach, especially given that G20 countries are responsible for around 80% of energy-related CO2 emissions and hold about 80% of global renewable energy capacity. Here, the G20 can go a long way in helping the world achieve its climate goals and access cleaner energy. We have a choice, as to the kind of future we want. Canada looks forward to working with all G20 members to ensure that the path we choose is the right one for our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for highlighting Canada's commitment to the cause and for affirming the support to G20 agenda. We now move on to our next speaker, His Excellency Mr. Hiroshi Ono, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of Japan. He will be joining us remotely, so if you can please patch him in.
Thank you very much, moderator, and greetings from Japan, and also thank you very much, TERI, for organizing the World Sustainable Development Summit 2023. It's a very important meeting, and it's my honor to participate in this important summit online and share my thoughts on the possible, the Green Development Pact, which is proposed from the Indian government. This year, I congratulate that the Indian government takes the presidency of G20, and I hope all of you are well aware that Japan takes the presidency of G7 this year. Both are in the Asian region. So I do hope that India and Japan will collaborate and cooperate to move forward both G7 and G20 in a kind of integrated and cooperative manner. I'm happy to announce and let you know that the Minister for Environment, Forestry and Climate Change of India, Minister Yadav, and Minister for the Environment Japan, Minister Nishimura, have been talking a couple of times, including on the occasion of COP27, as well as the Minister Nishimura's visit to India in January, that both of them agreed to cooperate as presidencies of G7 and G20 to have a kind of common agenda items in both G7 and G20. The possible candidate elements include the first, the lifestyle innovation, and second, the ocean plastic and circular economy issues. And third is the disaster prevention and disaster preparedness issues. And I'd like to take a couple of issues which would be included in the Green Development Pact of 5 pillars. I do appreciate India's leadership to put those Green Development Pact forward for our consideration in the G20. And today, let me elaborate a little bit on the 3 elements on the proposed Green Development Pact. The first one is the lifestyle of environment, and second one is circular economy, and third one is climate finance. The first on the lifestyle, we believe that the demand-side measures, including lifestyle and other end-use services, have a great potential to reduce global emission of greenhouse gases. This fact is clearly mentioned in a recent IPCC report, and Japan is expanding policy measures to promote the development of low and zero emission products and services through increased incentives and utilize nudges and support behavior changes considering various lifestyles. That's why I think the India's proposal to take a lifestyle of environment in the G20 is quite a good proposal. And I do hope that demand-side actions and sustainable lifestyle choices and preferences will be included in the final product, I mean the Green Development Pact, so that I think both G7 and G20 could move forward on that lifestyle and behavior demand-side issues together. The second one is the circular economy as well as the marine plastic litter issues. The G20 has agreed on the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision as well as the implementation framework for actions on marine plastic litter in 2019 under the Japanese G20 presidency. And we do believe that the current G20 Green Development Pact should deliver a strong message to step up actions based on the Osaka Blue Ocean Vision. And moreover, a wide range of approaches, including sustainable alternatives and technologies, should be explored to increase resource efficiency and a circular economy concept under the G20 Green Development Pact. And this is the second one. And third one is the climate finance. Of course, we are fully aware of the developed country parties' goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion US annually in climate finance as soon as possible and through to 2025. And also, we are fully aware of the developed countries' parties' commitment to at least double our collective provision of climate finance for adaptation. Japan is not only committing to those collective goals, but also we are firmly implementing our commitment towards those goals. And those are from the public financing issues, but we need also look at the private finance issues. And one of the very important and useful tools to increase or to improve, enhance private financing is the market mechanism under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This Article 6 mechanism could achieve the deep cut of the GHG emissions while stimulating our economies and investment to the zero carbon market. That's why Japan has established a Paris Agreement Article 6 implementation partnership at the COP27, and I'm very happy to learn that India is one of the very important and active partner of this partnership. Through this partnership, we think that the creation and building of a high integrity carbon market is quite important for both G7 and G20 countries, as well, of course, beyond. So I do hope that under the climate finance element of the Green Pact, we would like to see the establishment of high integrity carbon markets as well. Under the Paris Agreement Article 6, we are, promoting joint crediting mechanisms, bilateral or carbon crediting mechanisms with currently 25 partner countries, and I hope that broader countries, including India, we would like to explore more cooperation on a project basis through the AJCM mechanisms. Thank you very much, and over to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. It's quite heartening to see countries indicating their cooperation to the G20 process, and of course, we do look forward to the commitments continuing over the next few months as we move towards the convening of the G20 in September. With that, we move over to our next speaker. Dr. Bruno Oberl is the Director General with IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And over to you, sir, to give your remarks.
To speak from the podium?
You're free to speak from anywhere.
It's working? Honorable ministers, distinguished guests, friends, it's very interesting to be here and listening to the very good discussion that we had this morning. And I'm very honored to be part of this discussion. And congratulations to TERI for organizing now since more than 2 decades this very important gathering on sustainable development globally. So I have picked among the questions that we were asked to refer to the 2 questions: what norms in climate finance can be pushed through by G20, and how the G20 could collaborate or supporting, accelerating the journey towards the SDGs. In a way, both questions are one and the same. We had this morning this discussion more on the political side. We had a very clear pictures. We need to concentrate on important topics and not let us distracting by urgent topics. We need a true multilateralism that could be strengthened through the role of the G20 host state, started with Indonesia and ending in 2 years with Brazil. And it is about creating a new consumption and production model, a new development model that is more aligned with the limits that the physical platform on which we are living is imposing to our society. So transforming these dreams, these ambitions into reality is mostly about investments. It is mostly about allocating the scarce resources that we have to allocate. And it was mentioned also this morning, actually it is not so much money that we need. It is 2-3% of the global GDP, so between 2 and 4 trillions a year, to make the shift from the unsustainable way in which we are investing today into a sustainable investment pattern that will be needed. It seems to be a huge amount of money, 2.5 trillions, I guess it was the number that was quoted this morning, but at the end of the day, it is this 2.5% of the GDP is what all developed countries at least are investing year after year in creating and maintaining the sustainability infrastructure that is needed. So it's a realistic picture, but we are far away from these numbers with the 100 billion that we have committed under the climate discussion and the money that was committed in the Kunming-Montreal process that I will come back afterwards. We all agree that this amount of money imposes it will be money from a variety of sources. That will be a substantial part from the private sector, and an important part of the public sector money to trigger the process. We agree that one part of the money will be domestically raised and invested, and one part will be linked with international transfers. And we need, and we agree that acting on the supply side and as well on the demand side is critical to support the changes. So the theory then now allow me to make a jump and to go into the practical topics that are coming to the G20 from the different environmental processes that are running in parallel with the G7 and G20 gathering. In Sharm el-Sheikh, last year we had a year very rich in COPs. I guess there were 7 or 8 COPs in the environmental sector. From Sharm el-Sheikh, the new kid is the fund on loss and damage. And this is, of course, a very important tool. We are aware, it is a political decision that it is still an empty box, but it is a political decision that makes clear that the planet needs such, allow me to call it, such insurance system. Our behavior is causing problems. The one that causes have to pay. The one that are victims of these changes will have to be supported like in a normal insurance system. We have to continue the discussion, identify the amounts of money that are needed in these instruments, investigating how to structure the instrument, clarifying who will be paid amount, how will be paid, how much, and who will be paid, and we will receive under which conditions. This is one of the topics that I hope that the G20 can reflect on and give some push in preparation of the Abu Dhabi COP at the end of this year. On the climate side, on the mitigation side, it's a complete different game. It is not an insurance, a global insurance. It is not a global good that is targeted. It is about creating a complete new infrastructure, changing infrastructure from a fossil fuel linked infrastructure into a non-fossil fuel, non-CO2 bound infrastructure. In a way, it is a normal case for public markets, for global public markets. But there is a lot of challenges to mobilize these markets. We have heard several in the speeches previous to mine. I will not repeat them. So we need to have a treasury to activate those markets, to support the scaling up of technology that are critical to tackle the future. And this is, of course, have to be at the same time, it have to happen at the same time, like fossil fuel bound energy sources will be faded out. So it is logic that imposing levies on the beds to invest the money in the goods should be the solution. So it is what also the Japanese vice minister was mentioning. It is continuing working on the creation of a global CO2 markets that support this transition. It is, of course, not on the agenda just now. But it is something that it is in any case functional to a sustainable economy. And being the Director General of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, you allow me to broaden a bit the field of reflection and going beyond the climate discussion. We had in Montreal the second step of the Kunming-Montreal COP that have on one side decided a new framework of targets for the global community to conserve biodiversity, and on the other side has identified the amount of money that will be requested to make this transition. And these were bold numbers, 0.7 trillion a year, 0.5 of which to come from redirecting existing subsidies, a hard challenge as we know, and 0.2 trillion, 200 billion to come into from from a variety of sources, but as additional money flows to support this political decision. Here again is another game. It's important to clarify for what is the money, because it's not always the same. Here it is about creating a global infrastructure, actually. We want a green infrastructure that supports ecosystem services that our societies needs. So we have to plan, create, maintain, and protect a global infrastructure. The money will be invested there where this infrastructure will be needed, and this is, of course, make a diverse country like India particular responsible in this, and the money has to come from the global community that will have the benefit of this global infrastructure. So that will be, in any case, global domestic investment, but it will be also the need for international transfer here, like in the other fields. It is also about supporting, if we say, changing the subsidies that today are allocated, for example, in agriculture. We cannot change these subsidies patterns without supporting the communities and supporting the actors on the ground of this change with additional amounts of money. This plan is now set from the decision in Montreal, but the plan how to mobilize and distribute the money has to be reflected during the next two years, so during the Indian presidency of the G20 and the South African presidency next year. And then let me spend the last minute so remembering that there is also a number of negotiations ongoing that are beyond the terrestrial space. It is plastic pollution. It is generated on Earth, but the consequences are in the oceans. The BBNJ, also beyond national jurisdictions, regulations, are entering in their final phase, where we hope we will create a framework to create agreed protection rules in international waters, and we have very important decision to come on the very sensitive topics of using the seabed resources with seabed mining. We will have under the international seabed authorities in this year very important discussion for a potential first authorization of this of such extraction. That, of course, it will start, let's say, a potential threats to the ocean like we have experienced in the atmosphere. So a lot of to-dos actually to transform life into life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhadwal, for your comments and for highlighting the importance of loss and damage, and also highlighting the need for the investment flows. Thank you for flagging the kind of numbers which are required to make these changes happen. Friends, now I'll request our last speaker in this today's session, His Excellency André Correa do Lago, who is Brazil's ambassador to India and Bhutan, and who's also shortly taking over as Secretary Climate, Energy and Environment in Brazilian government. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for TERI for inviting me to be here today, surrounded by persons that have already said many of the things I should say. But most of all, I want to refer to what Amitabh Kant, my friend, mentioned about what the G20 can do in that agenda, and say a few things additional to that. One is that obviously the G20 can do a lot in that agenda, because to solve the issues and the challenges of climate change, it's essentially a question of economics, it's essentially a question of finance, and also because we all know that most of the emissions are emissions of energy, and energy is simply the engine of all the economies. So the G20 is also an opportunity for Brazil and India to get even more together. And I would like to remember, for instance, that in the climate change negotiations, Brazil and India coordinate in the context of BASIC, which is the Brazil, South Africa, India, and China group in the climate change negotiations, but also because we have this very happy sequence in the G20 of having now India, next year Brazil, and the following year South Africa. And as you know, we have IPSA, the Association of India, Brazil, and South Africa, that was created before BRICS, and that is going to be strongly revived now, since we want very much Brazil, now with its new government, to make sure that this association can be more and more constructive. So, in that context, I would like to register with enormous pleasure that India will be launching in the G20 the International Biofuels Alliance. And this element of biofuels that sometimes has created some varied debates is one of the elements of stronger association between Brazil and India at the moment. And I would like just to say a few words about that. Biofuels experience in Brazil has been extraordinary, and India is adopting a policy of biofuels and bioenergy that is by far the most ambitious in the world. And we are very happy with it, because not only India and Brazil being the two largest producers of sugar cane, we are naturally blessed to have a kind of biofuel that is highly sustainable already in the first generation. But the prospects of the second generation biofuels, which is already there, and India has already factories of second generation biofuels, and Brazil too, we are working obviously on lowering the price, but it is already a reality. Second generation biofuels in India will be a revolution. Why? Because of clean air. As you know, many of the issues related to pollution in cities in India is relative to the burning of waste of agriculture. And second generation biofuels will use waste of basically any product from agriculture to produce biofuels. On top of it, you will be also able to produce pellets of biomass, which substitute coal in coal thermoelectrics with the same efficiency as coal. So, biofuels in India and Brazil is an agenda of lower emissions, obviously, because cars emit much less with biofuels. Brazil, as you know, has only two options at the pump. You can either put gasoline with 27% ethanol or put 100% ethanol. India is on its way to reaching 20% mix of ethanol very soon, and there is a mandate for the production of flex fuel cars. Flex fuel cars are cars that can put as much gasoline or ethanol as you want, and in Brazil, 97% of the cars produced are flex fuel. And by the way, by all standards, flex fuel hybrid car from Toyota in Brazil is the lowest emitting car in the world, more than an EV in a country with high percentage of renewables in its electricity mix. So, this agenda is also an agenda of enormous reduction of the dependence of oil, which is something that India is wanting to do very clearly. It is an agenda that doesn't need great changes in infrastructure. On the opposite, you use the pumps that exist. You have the capacity to produce ethanol, and the distribution is obviously known. But one of the most surprising dimensions is the contribution of ethanol for green hydrogen. Because ethanol is probably the best way to transport and to store hydrogen. As you know, hydrogen is very dangerous to transport and to store. And if you use a system, a technology that is dominated also that you can put either in engines or in the pumps of reform, you transform the ethanol into green hydrogen. So this is the extraordinary possibilities that exist today that are in our hands and that we are doing inside the G20. And as Amitabh Kant said, this is what developing countries in the G20 can be great examples for not only the other developing countries in the G20, but also for our partners all over the world. I'm particularly happy that India, as was mentioned, is strengthening the issue of the lifestyle and behavior change, which I think is one of the most relevant SDGs. And I can only say that the partnership between India and Brazil, and even more because of this follow-up of Brazil next year, our coordination is extraordinary, and you will see this G20 sequence will be really an extraordinary moment for the G20. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, His Excellency Dolago. Thank you for highlighting Brazil's leadership in biofuels, which is, we all know. Thank you for highlighting the potential of next generation biofuels. This part of India suffers from every year the problem of air pollution in winter months. And yes, if we are able to have waste to biofuels as an option, it alleviates that problem. So thank you for flagging that. Friends, we would have loved to take audience questions, but I am being told that we are running really short of time. So I apologize. We'll have to bring this session to a close now. We had a very rich set of discussions and very rich set of presentation by all the panelists who highlighted what all needs to be done at a global scale in technologies, finance, business models, institutional architecture, innovation and R&D, what needs to be done to solve the global problem, how the countries can work together, and so on and so forth. On behalf of all of you, TERI and my co-moderator Suruchi, I thank all the panelists for their time, for coming over and sharing your rich perspectives and enriching the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, speakers. We'll start with the inaugural session shortly, so please be seated, everyone. Thank you.